Let's wait a minute. Okay, seems to be live. Fine. So today I probably a good amount of time talking about the ancient world, because I really love ancient history. I will start from this, like me talking about random thoughts I have about the ancient world, things like that. It's probably nothing but an excuse to talk about it right now. So one of the things I do like a lot about ancient history that really blows my mind away is the fact that they basically built all the foundations for most of the things that we consider like fundamental. I don't know what's the word for this, but most of the things that we take for granted, like language, writing, even basic mathematics, how we organize people, basic economy things. I mean, a lot of things that we in the day of technology today, of AI, on things that looks like magic for many people. Those things look like, oh, those are basic things, but when you think about it, when you think about how complex human language is, how complex is to organize a lot of people to do something, and how hard it is to actually invent something like mathematics and writing, then you start to admire a lot people from the ancient world. Like, it's hard to explain, for example, how to explain creating something that was not there. How to explain to someone the amazement of creating language, for example. It's something we all have. That's something we all have. So, how to put in perspective how great are the achievements of people like the Sumerians, like the Assyrians, Akkad, and the Egyptians, and the Babylonians, and people from the ancient world to basically build most of the things that we take for granted today that are not easy at all. So let's just assume it's the equivalent of, I'm not saying inventing a new language, probably the equivalent of just, I don't know, developing your, I mean, I'm talking about programming here, but it's probably the equivalent of developing your own computer, your own operating system. I don't know. It's very hard to put it into perspective and it's a very interesting play for the mind, an interesting game for the mind to think about it. But okay, as I will like to start like from the very beginning. I mean, it's not the very beginning anymore, because the Sumerian were not the first civilization. It seems that in Turkey there is data about civilizations about a civilization that existed like probably 5,000 years before the Sumerians. Although I am not sure if called that a civilization or just a small city with people. But anyways, I will be traditional and would like to start with the Sumerians. And when you look at the ancient Sumerian civilization, it just blows your mind, because yeah, it looks pretty old, and when you compare it with, I don't know, the Greeks or the Romans, it feels like a proto civilization. Yet you have to give it to the guys, because you have to give some credit to the Sumerians, because before them it's really hard and close to no register of, you know, handwriting, writing, basic economy, system, basic organized government. And you have them having all of that. They have a writing, they have a language, of course, they have some basic idea of economy, they have taxes, if I recall correctly. They implemented taxes already. That's probably one of the first things to exist in the world, sadly for us, but necessary for governments. And they have some basics, they have some really cool stuff, you know, for what we consider the first official, let's say, civilization in the ancient world. Because suddenly you have a civilization with language, with writing, with basic mathematics, by the way. They even had literature. Like, if I recall correctly, please don't get me wrong, but the story of Gilgamesh is a Sumerian story, and it's probably the first. I won't say the first because maybe there are some other stories lost in time, even before the Sumerians could be. Who knows? But it's the first known story literature work in history, and that's pretty amazing when you think about it. Because we are talking not about 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We are not talking about even 2,000 years ago. We are talking like God, like I don't know, if 6 to 7,000 years ago. Make up your mind to that number. Think about 7,000 years ago, and think about the fact that at that time in Sumeria there were people. I don't know, of course, not all people, but people from the upper classes who know how to read, who know basic mathematics. Probably they know how to do some basic additions and subtractions, and that's not the point. The point of that the concepts already exist. Because yeah, I can teach someone to say, okay, 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, fine. 2 plus 5 is 7. I don't know, or to count things. But to teach someone, or to discover, concepts, very abstract concepts, like numbers, counting, those kind of things, that's what really is hard. That's the hard part, actually. Because we really, not only we, even the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians in some way, all of them and us are just in the shoulder of giants, as Newton said once about Euler and others. I don't know if he was no, not Euler. He was talking about other people, but anyway. But the point is that the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Elam, Assyria, all of those very ancient civilizations put the very, very, very basic. I don't know if basic at all, because I wouldn't call literature something basic. I wouldn't call system organization, government organization something easy. Actually, that for me, at least for me, that's far harder than, I don't know, learning how to program in Python, for example. I take all the time the complexity of writing a software in Python than organizing thousands of people, for sure. I take all as the easy thing to do compared to organizing people. So we go here with the Assyrians. So I was just talking about the Sumerians. Like, I'm not talking specifically too much about them, just about how amazing is the fact that the first known civilization somehow, I don't know, it's very hard. You have cities, you have houses, you have taxes, you have written language, you have literature works, you have mathematics, you have a lot of things that, of course, it's not like the Sumerians invented that from day to night, and it's probably many of those things existed before them already. But the point is that we have to give a lot of credit to them, because they're basically the ones that really burn their head. They really make their brain to, I don't know, they put their brain to hot temperatures in order to achieve all of that, if that makes sense. Okay, so I would like to talk about the Assyrians now, because yeah, I know I am missing out people like Akkad, Sargon the Great. This is not a talk about story in a chronological order, or like some professional historian, how to call it. This is not a professional historian presentation. This is just a random dude that loves story, talking about things that he likes. It's nothing about that. So the Assyrians, the ancient Assyrians, are a pretty interesting civilizations. They are really demonized, by the way, by everyone. The Bible, primarily by the Bible, but you know, by their neighborhoods, like, by sorry, the neighbors like the Babylonians, Elam, even the kingdom of Israel too. I don't know if at that time it was a kingdom of Israel. I am not even sure about it. But the thing is that the Assyrians had a very, very bad reputation, we could say it. Because they were the first, I could say, the first official empire. Like, yeah, we could talk about some sort of proto-empire or imperial ambitions with Sargon the Great and Akkad. But the ones that really started and built something big in terms of conquering others and having some to be probably the first superpower of the region, those were the Assyrians. They rule at last. That's what we have from them. For what the archaeologists discovered about them is that they rule with a hand of iron. They were ruthless. Like, you went into an Assyrian, I don't know, into the palace of the king in Assyria, and you will see carvings of mutilated prisoners of war or awful torture scenes, you know, things that were there to scare the heck out of you. Like, if you are someone that's not from an Assyrian civilization and you were having a meeting with the king, you will see all of those things and you probably will feel like, okay, if I mess up with these guys, I am going to have a very bad time. And people had a very bad time when they were in the grown, let's put it like, grown side of Assyrian history, if that makes sense. If they were in the eyes of the Assyrians, that was probably a bad thing, a bad position to be in that time. So the Assyrians, although they have a very bad reputation, I believe we have to give them some credit that they they were the ones that mastered the what is called to govern a very large area. Like, they had in control many other governments. They even, I believe that they had in control for many years the Babylonians, Elam. I don't know what happened with Mary at this time, if it even exists or not. I'm not sure. I'm sorry about it. And we have a very beautiful structures and cities and also carvings from the Assyrians. One of the most common types of carvings we have from the Assyrians are usually about the king hunting a lion or killing a lion. It seems like it was a very popular time to do lion hunting. And also because I read some historians saying things like it was a symbol to represent how the king was the one to tame the power of the lion, etc., etc., like just to enhance the powerful image of the king of Assyria. So yeah, the Assyrians were the probably first true empire in the world, and they ruled with their good and bad moments, like at their peak and at their lowest. They ruled for like 2,000 years, and that's a lot. Approximately 2,000 years. An interesting thing, the moment they were at their peak of power was the moment they were destroyed. It's not like they had a fading decay like the ancient Egyptians. Like, you know, Egypt just decay with time. The great years of Ramses II or the Low Kingdom were long gone, and by the times of the Romans, Egypt was just nothing but a shadow of itself. The decay of Egypt started with probably, well, I wouldn't say it started, but when they were kind of conquered by the Macedonians, then Egypt started to become just a second player in the world. Yet, when the Macedonians took Egypt, Alexandria, the city in Egypt, became like the most important intellectual place in the ancient world for sure. Although I am not sure if I will call that ancient world. Maybe when we talk about Sumeria and Assyria, we can talk about really ancient world, and we talk about the Greeks and the Hellenistic period of the Egyptians, we can talk about the ancient world. Anyway, so the Assyrians, as I say, had a very bad reputation. They governed with a rule of iron, sorry, with a hand of iron. And you know, when you govern with violence, it tends to end bad at the end of the day, because you can humiliate people only for so long. And yes, the neighbors of Assyria had to wait a lot, but when the time came, they surely took their revenge against the Assyrians, and they destroyed Nineveh and all the cities of Assyria, to the point that we don't have too much left about them. Of course, we have a lot of structures and carvings, but I am pretty sure that most of the things from Assyria were destroyed or just stolen by the revenge of their neighbors. I am just putting here a map of the ancient world, and it's pretty interesting when you think of. I am not sure if this map is correct, by the way. Anyway, so it's pretty interesting when you think about this period of the ancient world. Of course, we are focusing in the traditional way of seeing history, because probably things were happening in South America, North America, that we don't even know about. Who knows? Or other parts of the world. But yet we tend to focus in this part of the world. And what they try to say is very interesting when you think about it, because when you read ancient history and you read about the Assyrians, Elam, Akkad, Sumeria, the Hittites, on all of them, the interesting thing to think about is that it was just a very small part of the world, yet it feels like it was the universe itself, if that makes sense. It feels like as if that small part of the world was basically where everything was happening, and all side of it, it's nothing but just, nothing really quotes interesting. That's usually the traditional way of seeing history. Okay, so as what I was saying, the Syrians used to have a very beautiful carvings about lions, huntings, and things like that. Oh, the Assyrians also had a very, let's say, cruel, or I don't know, strange habit of doing carvings of their enemies in pole. Yes, you hear me well. The enemies being in pole, or just behead. Like, you have the head of your enemies in carvings everywhere. I am sharing just now a very beautiful image, of course, a representation of what called the ancient Babylonian gardens. Looks like probably they were not like that, but who knows. Yet Babylonia was a very interesting city, I could say. Babylonia was a very, very interesting place of the world for me, and it holds a very special place in my heart, because you could say that Babylonia in the ancient world was like, I don't know, the equivalent of things like the MIT and Harvard today, although that will not make justice to Babylonia probably. But what I am trying to say is that lot of science, lot of mathematics, let's call it proto-science, because I don't think that real scientists will agree with calling what the Babylonians did science, but we could just say like proto-science and proto-logic, astronomy, mathematics. And the funny thing about the Babylonians and all, let's call proto-science at this time of the war, is like it was a mix between pseudoscience, a proto-science, logic, and mystic stuff, like mysticism. Like, you will see people talking about mathematics, about, I don't know, let's say architecture, and also mixing that with the position of this, I don't know, the stars, the mystic stuff. It's pretty interesting when you think about it. Yeah, it's iconic. I would say Babylonia would be like, if you're making probably an RPG game about an ancient alien civilization, Babylonia will be your top one choice as inspiration to do that. And I know games that did that actually. The Babylonians had a very bad time dealing with the Assyrians. Like, the Assyrians tended to have very good respect for the Babylonians, even if they hate them, cause they respected all their culture, and they saw the Assyrians saw the Babylonians as some interesting civilization. Let's say they did not hold the same respect for cities like Elam or the others. I am sorry, I'm not thinking about another cities right now, but for the Assyrians, Babylonia had a special place. Yet they wanted to rule Babylonia. They hold Babylonia in their power, and Babylonia tended to revolt from time to time, like, we don't want to belong to you, blah blah blah. And Assyria once had enough. Some Assyrian king decided that it had enough with the Babylonians, and they just massacred a lot of Babylonians. If I recall correctly, I don't know if they did this to Babylonians or Elamites, but I remember Assyrians actually, if the history goes like this, like forcing Babylonians to like take the bones of their fathers, like just make a hole and take the bones of their fathers from their tombs and destroy it, like as the ultimate humiliation before killing them or making them slaves. I don't know if they did this to the Babylonians of the Elamites, yet they were very harsh with the Babylonians. And something very interesting about the Babylonians is that about the ancient world, not only the Babylonians, but about the ancient world, is that somehow the statues of the gods, like you have a sculpture of statue of your god, it was sometimes not a representation of the god, but the god itself or something like that, or as a symbol very important of the god. So the Assyrians basically took the statue of the god Marduk, if I recall correctly, from the Babylonians and took it to Nineveh. And one interesting fact about this is that when Cyrus the Great, the mythical first Persian king, took power, and he basically recovered the statue of Marduk and gave it back to the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were like, yeah, we love this guy, we love the Persian and Cyrus the Great, or at last, and that's what we believe, because of course everything we know about ancient history are things from people who say stuff, and usually you have to take not a few things but everything with a grain of salt. So I like Babylonia for many things. It was a very important place also during the history of Alexander the Great. Actually, Alexander really loved Babylonia, I believe. He really wanted to. He really enjoyed his time there. One thing I like about the fact of Alexander the Great, and not about Alexander itself. I am not saying I am a fan of Alexander, but that period is that the Greeks had an idea that every other civilization was somehow barbarian, inferior. That still happens today, by the way. But yeah, the Greeks were probably pioneers of that thinking. Who knows? Not saying the Greeks were not great. The Greeks are one of my favorite, if not my favorite civilization. But I have to be honest, they tended to think that they were somehow special, and the other were all barbarians. Yet Alexander Yet when Alexander went to Asia and conquered, many places, went to Persia, to Babylonia, that was part of Persian Empire at the time. Alexander discovered that it was not quite like that. Many of the structures in Asia were as great, if not greater, than things that the Greeks had. Also, many of the knowledge that we in the past attribute to the Greeks actually were in part somehow invented first or partially discovered by Egyptians, Babylonians, or stuff like that. Heck, the Greeks actually went to study to Egypt mathematics usually because they knew that the Egyptians had some very smart people there to learn about mathematics and architecture. And more of that, actually, the Egyptians were the ones who I don't know to say if invented, but who probably pioneered the many of the structures that we will call Greek architecture today, like the typical column that you will consider this is a Greek or Roman column or structure. The Egyptians did that like thousands years before the Greeks even started doing that. Okay, so I just lost my train of thought and I started to talk about the Greeks. I went ahead like 1,000 years in the future. Anyway, so I really love the Babylonians. Honestly, they appear everywhere. They appear in the history of Egypt. They appear in the history of Assyria. They appear in the history of the Persians. They appear in the Bible. They appear in the history of Alexander the Great. So you can be sure that it was one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic civilization at that time, together with let's say the Egyptians. So here is a drawing about representing the fall of Nineveh, or kind of. And yeah, as I told you before, the Assyrians ruled the world like for 2,000 years, approximately. But everything has to come to an end, and if you rule with a hand of iron, then your enemies will take you with a hand of iron, if that makes, well, not with one but two hands of irons, if that makes sense. And yeah, they destroyed the Assyria, and actually in the Bible, even the Bible was like, yeah, they deserve to get destroyed. I am not saying that, by the way. I know there is a lot of, how to call it, there is a lot of bad propaganda about the Assyrians. I am not saying that they were kill dudes, but I am trying to say the ancient world was brutal. I like and I tend to romanticize the ancient world, and probably many of us does. Like when you think about all the marvels of the ancient world, the structures, inventing the language, the first literature works, one tend to imagine that the ancient world is some sort of paradise where ancient people thinking, being really smart. But no, it's just a part of that world, and there is a lot of brutality in the ancient world. Torture, mutilation, things that are awful, rape as a normal thing. I mean, there is a lot of awful stuff in the ancient world that will prevent me to travel into the past. Yet, at the same time, because before any of us thinks that we are an enlightened civilization, that we are above all of that, just think about how many wars are happening right now in the world before thinking that. And if you think that torture and rape and those things do not exist today, you better check the news again, and not only the news. So the ancient world was brutal. Yes, of course. Probably the modern world is less brutal. I am totally agree with that. You don't have, well, it's less brutal, but it probably the last few years, the last few decades, because you have the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. You have a lot of killings, millions of people dying in the 20th century is awful in terms of killing. It's just insane. It's totally insane. Anyway, so Goodbye Nineveh. It was nice to have you Assyrians, or I don't know. That depends who say that. Let me see what I'm trying to look at. The Egyptians. Okay, so one of my other favorite civilizations about the ancient world, and a very popular one by the way, are the Egyptians and ancient Egypt. And I have to say that how to explain myself with this, cause I could say that the Egyptians made many of the things that we love about the Greeks. And I am not exaggerating here. Of course, the Egyptians did not invent logic. There was no Aristotle. There was no Euclides yet. I think people like Archimedes, people like Euclides actually, they actually work at the library of Alexandria, and one can say, yeah, but that library was created thanks to the Hellenistic period of Egypt. They brought culture, civilization, blah blah to Egypt, and that's partially true. Yet they did very nice stuff in terms of mathematics. They many documents were discovered about things that we saw first that the Greeks invented, but then we realized the Egyptians knew those things few hundreds years ago, or probably 1,000 years ago. You just have to look at the architecture, but it's not. Sorry, here I have to say something, because when we think about the amazing about the ancient world, when we think, oh, how great they were, we tend to think about mathematics. We tend to think about architecture, literature, and all of that is great. It's not. It's really amazing, by the way. But there are more things about that, and probably the most incredible thing is our government organization, because it was a big thing to rule. It was not governing a few hundred people. It was thousands of people, probably, if not more, if not far more, probably. And you have like cities, like it's the equivalent of states if you live in the United States, or okay, things like that. But we know that, and I wouldn't say the equivalent of states because they didn't have that autonomy, yet they have some autonomy though, and they have a very interesting government. Because yes, the pharaoh was the maximum figure of power, but that does not mean that a governor of region in Egypt was powerless neither. They have political power, they have political will, they were able to influence or determine probably what decision to take, because if you govern a place like Egypt and you have different regions that you rule, you probably don't want to make everyone upset, because you can be the pharaoh all you want, but if you have everyone against you, you know, when everyone is mad at you, the divine goes away usually. One thing I like about Egypt is all the organization structure. When you read about them, you see how basically they organize their economy, they organize their taxes, they organize their cities, their industry. I wouldn't say industry, but I mean you get the point. Like the farmers, how the payments, basically the government. We have this idea of ancient Egypt having all slaves and everyone being a slave and working for the pharaoh and dying in the desert, but that is not a thing that will last. If Egypt was that, if Egypt was really a place when everyone was a slave and everyone worked for the pharaoh and he was a tyrant that treated all badly all the time, no civilization can last thousands of years with people like that, with a government like that. Not saying they were not tyrant pharaohs, probably they were, but it's not like the Egyptians were some Pharaoh have all the power in the world and other people are just there as nothing. No, no, they have some government organization. And I want to say something uncomfortable for people who love democracy. And I am one of those. I love democracy and I believe it's one of the best, if not the best, organizations in the world. Yet, an autocratic regime does not mean that the autocrat is the one with all the power. That's something to take into account. Because we know we have our bias. We live in a democratic world, and we have the bias of everything that is not democratic is bad, and everything that is democratic is good. And yet, with that bias, we tend to look at places like Egypt or Assyria, the Roman Empire, places like that, as a bunch of bad people treating bad other citizens, and ruled by one or a few people that decided everything. And I assure you that a system like that will not last even 100 years, and those civilizations we are talking about lasted for thousands of years. So yes, the Egyptians get my love a lot. They are the kind of civilization that when I read about them, I learn things. I learn about. When I mean I learn things, I learn like how amazing the human brain can be, how amazing a civilization can be, and how hard actually many of the things that we take for granted in human history were built and invented with lot of effort and lot of very smart people together working together. And one thing I have to say, probably I want to say before ending this short video about me talking about ancient history, is that in a time when everything seems so advanced, in a time where we have machines, computers, we have planes, when we have an atomic bomb, we have AI, when everything looks so complex, so amazing, and those ancient civilizations look for us and something primitive, we have to remember something very important. And that's the fact that, genetically speaking, probably their brain were the same as us. And I am sure, I am totally sure about this, that they were not any fools at all. That they were not the kind of fools that not want us to believe, though, that we tend to believe that we are in some sort of advanced future, that probably we are. I don't know, who knows? There is a plane flying over my house. That's quite amazement. That's quite amazing, and will make an ancient people think we are gods, probably, or something. I am not sure if that, but what I'm trying to say is that we have a lot of things that are nothing but the work of generations of smart people and very intelligent people. I don't know if smart people only, actually work of a lot of people, and we are only standing on those shoulders. Yeah, we can just collect all the hard work from people like the ancient Egypts, like Sumerians, like Homer, like the person whoever wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh, Archimedes, Euclides, or people like that. We are standing over the shoulders of people like that, and this is a thought for us, for many people in the modern world. Probably think about how will go a conversation between you and an academic person from the ancient world. Think about it and think if they actually will look as a fool to you or not. But don't take in account the knowledge we have. Like, yeah, I can go to the ancient world and say to a person, like, I don't know, a mathematician from the ancient Egypt, and say him, look, I know how to do an integral. I know how to do derivatives. I know how to, I don't know, do topology in R5 or whatever like that. But that's not being smart. That's just talking about something I read about, something I learned. put the same tools and the same conditions and place, and think if you will be able to be smarter than them or not. I am not saying that you are going to be fooler than them, that they are going to make you look like a fool, but probably they have some very good, nice problem solving and thinking as we do, if not even more probably, because we have a lot of help. We have to remind us that we have a lot of help in our modern world about how to solve problems, how to think, and sometimes when you don't have the tools and you have to do all or most of it from scratch, that improves your solving skill a lot. So okay, so I will stop talking how great the ancient people were. I am not, that's not my point, but I am just saying respect the ancient people. They do deserve respect from me. And I will put a image of one of the most important figures in the ancient world, Ramses II or Ramses the Great. He was basically one of the most important pharaohs in the ancient world. He was able to put the ancient Egypt at that time close to its peak. And he built a lot of things. I believe I don't recall correctly if he was the one who won a battle against the Hittites, the most powerful. The ancient Egypt had two very powerful neighbors, the Hittites and the Nubians, if I recall correctly. And of course then the Assyrians and many other civilizations, but historically speaking, the rivals of Egypt were the Hittites and to some extent the Nubians. Depending, the Nubians were sometimes friends, sometimes rivals, depending the time you are talking about. So anyway, this is my random thoughts about the ancient world. I just wanted to talk about this. I wanted to actually say something in English because I am practicing my English. This is a secret between you and us and me. And anyway, I will probably see if I keep talking about the ancient world in the future or not. It's just random stuff. Okay, so goodbye. I hope to see if I can publish some stuff about my random thoughts about the ancient world.